Good morning, it's Andy with Mountain Computers, and it's Monday, February 11th, and I want to tell you about network routers today. Saturday and Sunday I took the day off, and today we'll be covering a couple interesting subjects. And the most important one that for your home is how do you connect to the internet? Not only just having a good computer, running fast, and so on and so forth, but when you connect to the internet, you want to have, for your home and your business, a good router, and you got to understand your router. So I'm going to talk about 6 or 7 routers that I have, going back in time, very old to very new, and the prices. Everybody needs to know what the prices are. So anyhow, let's talk about one of the oldest routers that I have. This is a cable DSL router. It's probably about 15 years old. It's from Linksys. It's a BEF SR41 model number. On the back, real basic, you need to understand, let's see, this is black, it's hard to see. On the back, there's 4 Ethernet ports. There's a wide area network port, that's where the internet plugs in, and then your reset switch. Then here's your power, your standard 12 volt power that plugs in. And on the front, there are LED lights that show you your connectivity for each one of those ports. 1, 2, 3, 4, power, and the make and model of the router. Some routers will come with Wi-Fi, and I'll show you a couple like that. But for the most part, these routers back in the day cost $60, $70, maybe more. Today they're $30, $40. They're not that expensive. Again, your AC-DC transformer has to be the right voltage, not necessarily the right current, and the right tip, like we covered in our last video on AC-DC power adapters. It's a transformer, transforms AC to DC. 110 volt to 12 volt, or whatever, 5 volt. So, this here is one of my favorite routers. This here is a Cisco RVS 4000. This is one of my main go-to routers for home and small office business. Not a high-end business, but it has to do with how many computers can be connected to it on the inside, which is your local area network, to the outside, which is your wide area network. As you can see, 4 ports again, that's your local area network, LAN, and WAN, WAN, which stands for wide area network. Again, your reset switch and your power connector right there. Standard connector. And on the front, you have more interesting diagnostic activity. 4 ports, 10, 100, 1000. I don't know if you can see this. 10, 100, 1000. We never see 10 hardly anymore, unless it's like a point of sale machine, which has to step down for the voltage, for whatever, cash registers or some sort of like point of sale, what do you call them? Oh, your credit card machines. I've seen those in some of the point of sale machines. They have to be 10 megabit per second. Old technology, but it works. And then, of course, again, your manufacturer, Cisco. I like Cisco. We have 2 or 3 other different types of manufacturers we use. But again, the RVS 4000, the reason why I like it is it has one feature which is called Intrusion Protection System, IPS. And it basically sits there and monitors the packets coming in and looks for intrusion. And it says, hey, this is not good, we're going to block this. The detection part of it, IPS and IDS, it doesn't do the IDS side. It just does the IPS side. That's that router. That router right there used to cost like $150, and now they're obsolete, but they're very cool. The next one, which I use, this one's called a Cisco RV320. An RV320 is a security router for web applications and servers. Just like the Cisco RVS 4000, the RV320 is the newer model of the same thing. It can handle a lot of simultaneous connections. I use it for like my web servers and my email servers, my database servers. It has multiple WAN ports for redundancy. It has multiple LAN ports, just like the normal small office switch. It has your power, and it has an on-off switch. I do like that. One thing when it comes to networking devices, when I ask people when they call me, hey, my internet's not working, I said, have you power cycled? your internet switch, your router. And they go, I don't know what that means. And I go, how do you connect to the internet? And they say, I don't know. And I'll say, your computers, your laptops, your devices, they connect to some device somewhere in the house that connects to the outside world. Where is that? And they'll say it's in a closet or it's in another room or whatever. I'll tell them to go in there and unplug the power and then plug it back in and give it 15 minutes or so to settle down and reconnect and reprovision, all these things that Charter Cable, Comcast, all of them give you when you do troubleshooting. Well, for the most part, what's important is if the person on the other end of the line isn't saying the right word or you don't understand it, there's a difference between rebooting a switch and a router than resetting it. To reset a router is a bad thing because it blanks out the configuration. Now some routers and switches will actually determine how long you press like a paper clip or a pin that has a real fine point. This little hole right here in the front of this, you can see that. If you hold it in like 10 seconds, it just does a reset. But if you hold it down longer, it does a harder reset. Now, maybe not on this model. I can't remember because I'd have to look at the documentation. But you have to be careful when it comes to routers and somebody telling you to reboot it or reset it. There's a big difference. I have seen people reset these things and they blank them out, and you have to re-download the operating system and the firmware from the manufacturer, and in order to do that you have to have the internet. So you can always plug your PC or your laptop directly into your cable modem, and we'll talk about that right now. Here's a real simple one. This is a Motorola cable modem. It comes off your coaxial cable from your internet provider, and it has a USB connector and an Ethernet connector. This Ethernet is an RJ45 connection. This one here is a standard, doesn't even tell me, yeah, it's a Surfboard SB5101U, or 01U. Yeah, 5101U. It's 100 megabit. You have to understand when you pay your bill, when it comes to networking, how much are you paying for and how much you are getting. Some people don't understand the difference. They say, well, I pay a lot. Well, what is a lot? Back in the day of dial-up, it was like $24 a month. That was the going retail rate for one dial-up connection with one username and password. As things move forward, we got to DSL. Before that, you could combine your two dial-ups to become what's called a shotgun feature. And that shotgun feature would allow you to bond two dial-up connections at the same time and double your speed, technically. And that worked pretty good. I had some of those. As far as the DSL, that speed and connection type, a DSL modem like from AT&T or whatever, those were 5x2, 5 meg down, 2 meg up. So your connectivity to the internet was not symmetric. That's considered 5 down, 2 up is asymmetric, where one speed is different than the other. Symmetric speeds, that's a very expensive connection. Just because the internet provider, it's not that they can't do it, it's just that they don't want to provide it. Unless you're a business and you pay that extra to get that benefit because you're pushing more data or equal amount of data as you're pulling for an office. Back to the routers and routing. So when it comes down to these two types of switches, Cisco, those are medium to upper end types of switches. I'm not going to cover hubs right now. The terminology of a hub, a switch, a router, a bridge, those types of devices, the real hardcore people are very particular about what word you use to describe what device. I sort of agree with them to a point. They can be really fanatical about it. I'm just trying to get somebody to understand they have a device in their home or their office that connects their entire network to the internet. This cable modem, if it comes from Charter, occasionally if the provider goes up or down, storm or construction down the street, there will be lights on the front, they'll be flashing, and you have to understand which lights are actually on, what are green, what are red, what are yellow. and have a basic understanding of what these always should look like. Take a picture of it if you need to. Take your cell phone, take a picture of everything that you got going on. Just so if you have to explain to somebody over the phone and you're traveling and somebody else is running your office, you can say, this is where you need to unplug, plug in, what do the lights say? Basic awareness training for your home network. So a hub is multi-port, 3-port, 5-port, 8-port, 16, 32, 20, 24. Some of them can be big, some of them can be small. For instance, this one here, this here, SRW 2016, this is a 16-port, 10, 100, 1000 gigabit switch with WebView. Now I keep this around for some of my subcontractors that, you know, come and go. They'll come into town, they'll need to borrow something like this, and they don't have something on the shelf down at your local Best Buy or your local, we don't have a Fry's, so I keep a couple of those around. 2 or 3, they're handy. I don't use them here, I used to, just for fun, but really I only need like a 4-port switch router. Some are managed, some are unmanaged. That one I believe was managed. SonicWall. This is a really interesting type of switch and router. There are 2 schools of networking. There's those that use the command line interface like MS-DOS command or terminal, and then those that use the GUI, the graphical user interface, or your mouse. Those 2 types of network types of people. I am a command line interface kind of guy, and I'll use the GUI to do major architectural view. But when it comes down to managing devices, I'll use the command line interface more than not. But with SonicWall and with Cisco, you can do both. With SonicWall, I like to use the GUI. With Cisco, I like to use the GUI. But the higher end routers and switches, I'll use the command line interface. But the same thing goes on even the more expensive SonicWall devices. This is a silver one. It's got Wi-Fi built in. As you can see, it's got what's called a console port. This port here, that port there, that console port, is how you manage the device. It's a standard RJ45 connector that goes into probably a serial or USB connector that plugs into your computer. And then you run some program like HyperTerminal or something like that to manage your connection. And you got to program that. The WAN interface again. There's an optional port there. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ports. Now on some networking switches, 1, 2, 3, 4 might be the main LAN connections, the RJ45s that take care of your printers, your scanners, your computers, your connection to other switches and routers in your office. And there will be one port that duals as an uplink or a local port. So you have to really look at the back of your networking device to say, does port 1 or port 5 act as a normal port, or is it an uplink, an out only to the next device? You have to pay attention just a little bit. This one has a weird power connector. Technically, I think all electronic devices should be the same voltage if it's DC and the same connector type. The world would be so much better if all of our laptops and all of our networking devices had the same connection and the same voltage and the same tip type. And we wouldn't have all these problems of, oh, I can't find one to match. I mean, even in my store, I've got like 20 different types of AC-DC transformers based on 4 or 5 different types of routers. That's a bad thing to maintain. So SonicWall. I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. The next one here, it's a little more interesting, is a Netgear. This one here is a ProSafe VPN firewall, FVS 318. A lot of security surveillance networks use this. A little bit more complicated to manage. It has more ports, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It actually has a ground screw. That means something important, especially if it's used in a installation outside where it can be exposed to more environmental atmospheric issues. Also, there's the reset switch, your normal power on-off switch, and then you actually have your WAN. It actually is your internet. But in this case, it has 8 ports. And on the front, you will see the diagnostic lights, and you'll see link, activity, and 100. You have power, test, link, activity. When these boot, they'll stay in a maintenance mode, a boot up mode, a little bit longer than most. But they're not too bad. These are pretty expensive. These can be anywhere, depending on where you buy them from, like $150, as low as $80. Here's another SonicWall. This is a little older one. This one's a TZ190. It's pretty old. I don't have the power. I don't have any of this stuff. But if I need it in a pinch for an existing customer that has an existing SonicWall, I can pull that out, find power, use it. Here's another SonicWall. This one has a Wi-Fi component. This one's pretty cool. This is a TZ100 wireless. It's pretty cool. I didn't used to like SonicWall because they were hard to configure, but then I realized with SonicWall, most of the support people say use the wizard. When you log into the portal on your local network, and I haven't even talked about managing these things yet, there's a wizard, and that wizard is really good about helping you manage this device without having a lot of technical know-how. You just got to know some of the basics of what you're trying to achieve. But basically, you want to connect your home network to the internet and have it secured and safe. And these have built-in firewalls. We haven't even talked about firewalls yet. What else do we got? We're talking about this one. I don't know if we talked about this one yet. This one here is a TZ180. It's a Wi-Fi component. Same thing. Same number of ports. It's got 5 ports, an optional port, a WAN port, and a console port. I hope you folks that are watching this are finding this useful. I've noticed some of the videos that I've put up there, they're like 0 views, and then some that have a lot of views. And I don't know if it's whether or not I posted it on Twitter or Facebook, or whether or not the subject is appealing. But I can tell you one thing, the way in which I go over this is pretty basic. I talk to my clients and customers that come into the store and on site the same, you know. They'll have a question, I'll give them an answer. If they want me to describe and explore things, I do. But we already covered that router, switch, router, switch, router, switch, router, switch, router, switch, router, switch. So let's talk about pricing and types of manufacturers. Okay, so let me just go down the list. The ones that I buy the most right now are TP-Link. TP-Link. Sounds like toilet paper, but it's not. I get those at Best Buy, or I'll get them on Office Depot, and I'll get them on sale. I won't get the expensive ones. I'll get the basic run-of-the-mill ones that cost anywhere between $60, $80 to $100. The higher end ones, like there's D-Link and then there's Netgear. And this is for home or small office usage. The ones like those are for gaming and for heavier network usage. The Nighthawks, things like that. Those cost more. You start at $150 and go all the way to $300. I don't usually use those. If I had a family of 4 or 5, my wife, me, and each of us have multiple devices, and we have 2 or 3 kids, and all of them have their cell phones, their laptops, their PCs. Now you're talking about a lot of devices in the home, and that is crazy, because even if they just leave them on, they're talking to the internet, they're doing downloads. You know, the Apple portal is talking to them, they're getting their iTunes, they're getting their iCloud, they're getting their iPhone, everything's getting backed up, everything's getting downloaded, whether or not it's in sleep mode, whether or not an update's coming. I mean, there's a lot of activity just on one device. Just on one device. And you multiply that by 15, oh my goodness. And you wonder why 100 megabits from Charter here in Reno is just enough. Now, admit, this isn't all the time that all of these devices are talking and pulling down stuff. It's pulling down, at best, probably 50% of that traffic if they're streaming Netflix, if they're streaming Pandora, if they're streaming any kind of traffic. Even Hulu. All of these have significant bandwidth, especially with 4K video coming. So you have all your Wi-Fi going on in the house. I mean, there's Wi-Fi everywhere. Even in my store, I have 4 or 5 Wi-Fi networks, and I use every one of them for a different reason. One for the public, one for business, one for personal, one for testing. Obviously, that's why I have all these routers. But you haven't seen anything that's plugged in and being used. But back to the manufacturers. TP-Link, D-Link, Netgear, Cisco, SonicWall. What are some other ones? Put those in the comments, ask questions. What else about routing? Well, let's talk about the network equipment. How do you know if one's gone bad? If you unplug it and plug it back in and it behaves for a couple hours, Troubleshooting 101 says something's going on. Either a device in your environment is affecting it negatively, or the internet provider is causing it problems. Now, this could be a storm, this could be construction down the street. I alluded to that earlier. I've had calls in a given day progress, and I say, where's everybody calling from? And it's some part of the city, some part of a street. I just ask them, what's going on? When did it last happen? Is the wind blowing? Is there construction going on in the building they're in? That's a big one. People don't pay attention to their environment. And I'm like, really? Seriously, you don't think that that electrical outage is going to interfere with your internet? And it does. I know it sounds like common sense, but it really is. Just think about it. When it rains and it snows like what we've had here, the roads will be slippery and you have to drive a little bit more careful. I mean, just the ice alone is dangerous. But back to routing, networks, devices. Most important is to know your pricing. How long does it take you to replace a router in your home office? A day, 2 days? Can you just go up the street and grab another one and reconfigure it? Yeah. If all of your traffic that you're pulling is just downstream, then it's not a big deal. $50 an hour later. You call me, I'm going to charge you an hour minimum. So you're looking like $100, $120, and the device. So it's another $100, $150. And that's it. You're back up and you're in business. You want to make sure that when you reprogram these devices, that the local area network, has a number. We call it like a 192.168.1.network or a 172.16.1 network. That networking identification by the numbers, a lot of people don't understand. They just want it to work. Well, in a business or in a home business, you want to know what that third digit is. Is it a 1 network, a 0 network, a 10 network? Because when it comes down to all of your devices talking to each other, like printers, network printers, wireless printers, servers, etc., when you replace a router, you want that network to be exactly the same as it was. Even if you have to reprogram this device to make it behave like it used to. The other thing you have to do is your internet provider in the old days would program what's called the MAC address of your device into their upstream network switches. And that MAC address, not a Mac like an Apple, but a MAC, Media Access Control address, was on the back of the router. So if you replace the router, you just couldn't throw this away. You had to write this number down and program it into the next router, so you didn't have to like rely on the upstream support people to reprogram it to the new MAC address. We call that MAC cloning. That clone is you taking this number and reprogramming it into the replacement device. It doesn't matter the manufacturer. You're just putting it in there so you can get back into business quickly. You don't want to be out of business for too long. After you're back in business, then you can contact your internet service provider and talk to them about, yes, I replaced my router, and yes, I might have a different media access address. Now, don't confuse this address with another MAC address, because your wireless routers like this will have multiple MAC addresses. MAC address for the Wi-Fi, MAC address for the WAN address, MAC addresses for anything else that might be plugged in, like an optional port. The other thing about networking that I want to cover is that on some switches, all the ports are not the same. Like on a SonicWall, you will have an X 0 port, 1, 2, 3, 4. These are not all the same typically. So you have to pay attention when you unplug your network cables, what cable goes into what port. In another video we talked about cables and color coding. For instance, the WAN port that goes from here to your Charter modem will be, for me, a red cable. And the red cable means don't unplug this, or if you do move it, make sure you put it back where it was. The yellows and the blues for the local area network connection, those don't really matter. Gray, white. But it's important to pay attention. Take a picture if you have to. I tell customers all the time, when you unplug things, before you do that, take a picture of it with your cell phone. And you can always refer back to it when you go to plug things back in. If things aren't working, did you plug something into the wrong port? I don't know, I think that's about it. This has been a real high-level overview down to the mid-level of understanding of how you deal with networking devices. SonicWall used to scare me a lot because they were popular to some group of people. It's not so much anymore, but it's a very strong device. When I say strong, it can handle a lot of traffic and load. The consumer grade ones, these can't handle a lot of sustained traffic anymore. That's why you don't see these anymore. You'll see ones that are a little bit more industrial, and it's basically because of the high-speed networks that you have for streaming lots of video. They just can't handle. In the old days, it was just hit or miss. You go to a website, you'd read it, and so you'd pull down a lot of content real fast, and then you would sit. Well, today things are just constantly flowing like the river coming into your house. One thing I do want to note when it comes down to the internet and your home office, these older devices have a feature in them, and like what I talked about, the internet address 192.168.1 or 0, knowing that network in order to reprogram a replacement, there's a second set of information inside your router called DNS. That stands for Domain Name Service. So DNS in a nutshell is a global directory lookup, like when you call the operator and say, I'm trying to find so-and-so in the world. Can you tell me where this is? And then they say, oh, that person is at this number. DNS goes forwards and backwards. I give it a number, it can give me a name. So when I say, give me google.com, google.com would be 8.8.8.8. And the reverse of that would be google.com. That's not the web hosting, that's just the DNS stuff. So I'm asking the global directory provider at Google, and it's not a master DNS, it's just one of those providers that you get help from when it says I'm looking for things on the internet. So the old devices don't support the DNS as well as the new devices, and it has to do with the size of the caching. And then one big thing which we haven't covered is IPv4 versus IPv6. IPv4, which is the way the internet talked around the globe, it's like a protocol version. The older routers don't support the newer ones, IPv6. We'll get into that, maybe, but basically what IPv4 is, every device in the world, the internet-facing address is what the IPv4 was talking about. When it comes to routers like this, the internet-facing address, the WAN address, the wide area network address, that had to be unique. Well, IPv4 only allowed for a maximum number. Well, we started running out of those numbers because more devices came online. So the moral of the story is we had to come to a new addressing scheme called IPv6. IPv6 says we're going to have, 128 times more addresses or more. I'm not using a valid number, but it's astronomical. I mean, we can go into space and have an entire civilization with that address space. It's not easy to read. It's funky. It's long. But the older routers don't support that. The newer ones do, but the newer ones don't necessarily have it turned on automatically. And that's because the United States is probably the slowest country because of just the way we work. to switch over. Every country in the world, except the U.S., had switched to IPv6, as well as maintaining IPv4 a long time ago. So.